Okay, so here we have two aliens named Dobie and Gallon from the Globlorian race. They were selected and sent on an expedition to find other life in the universe. They traveled very, very far and eventually made it to a galaxy called the Milky Way. And they saw there was a bunch of planets, but one intrigued them the most. It was Earth. The first thing they noticed was the vibrancy of the blue and green areas on this planet. This made them think that it contained life. So before they entered Earth, they decided to run some measurements and found that the planet was supported by a star, and the star was 93.025 million miles away. This put the planet in perfect position to support life. Kept it in a temperature range of about negative 15 degrees Celsius to 115 degrees Celsius. So this planet was kept warm enough to carry out chemical reactions naturally, but also cool enough to prevent the denaturization and breaking down of genetic material and proteins, which are pretty important for life. They noticed that the sun emitted a radiation and some energy which traveled through space, and they had a pretty good understanding of the laws of energy and knew that energy could not be created or destroyed. So they had a pretty well idea that there must be some processes on Earth that converts this energy of the sun into energy that can be used by all life forms. So they decided to enter into the atmosphere. First thing, they noticed pretty quickly that this atmosphere was pretty thick. It was 100 miles thick, and so this kind of told them some things. This told them that it prevented harmful radiation from the sun to enter the atmosphere, which protects life. It also told them that the planet was insulated. This insulation keeps the surface of Earth warm, and they decided to take a sample of the air to see what was going on there. So they opened up their little gas valve and got a sample. And they analyzed the sample, and they noticed that it was made up of a ratio of nitrogen, oxygen, argon, and carbon dioxide, as well as other gases in trace amounts. And they decided that this was pretty perfect for what forms of life they would find on Earth. They also noticed that there was a lot of water vapor in the air. They decided that this helped cool the planet. So they also found out what this massive blue area was, and they realized that 70% of the Earth's surface contains water. So they wanted to see what this water was like, what this blue stuff was like. So they scooped up a little sample of water from the ocean, and they threw it into their matter analyzer. This told them the structure of water and the composition. They noticed that it was made up of two elements, oxygen and hydrogen. These two elements were set up in a way in which they had a bond angle of 104.5 degrees, and this was influenced by the electronegativity of oxygen, which created dipoles in the molecule. These dipoles, they realized, would allow them to create hydrogen bonds with each other, giving water a unique structure. They also decided to take the boiling point, and they found that it was 100 degrees Celsius, and the freezing point, which was 0 degrees Celsius. This told them that water could be found in its liquid form pretty much anywhere on Earth. They also ran some tests with sample cells and saw that water can transfer across membranes, and they did this in transferring from the high to low concentrations. This, they noticed, created a pressure called osmotic pressure. So they got closer, and they found humans. So they wanted to see what these human cells were like, what was going on inside their bodies. So they took a sample and they noticed that these humans were made up of a lot of elements, but the four main elements were carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and hydrogen. They decided to take some more samples of different animals and some plants, and they noticed that they were made up of pretty much the same elements. They also noticed that there was some different types of cells on Earth, which we call prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells. These prokaryotic cells are single-celled organisms, and they noticed that they were pretty simple in the way they were structured. They had no membrane-bound organelles, freely floating genetic material, and so they analyzed these eukaryotic cells and noticed that they were much more put together. They had membrane-bound organelles. Their genetic material was protected inside of a nucleus, and they wondered why. They wondered why this was the case. What happened to have these two different types of cells on the planet? So they analyzed these eukaryotic cells more, and they noticed that they have many different organelles, including the mitochondria, the rough and smooth endoplasmic reticulum, the nucleus, the lysosomes, and in plant cells, they noticed there was something extra called chloroplasts. So they decided that these cells had evolved, that prokaryotic cells had evolved to compartmentalize their organelles in a way in which their processes could be most efficient. They saw that in the organelles they had all of the components they needed and concentrated into these spaces. They also noticed that the cells ran many processes at once without disrupting each other, and this was due to each organelle having their own confined space. They also noticed that each organelle could control its environment in terms of pH, and they also noticed that some cells needed a larger surface area. So some examples of this are the mitochondria, which needs a larger surface area in order to increase the efficiency at which it generates ATP. Its structural features of its membrane give it a larger surface area. And then they saw that within lysosomes, they operated at a lower pH than the other organelles. And they wondered how, and after more analysis, they saw that the membrane had these pumps, these protein pumps, which allowed for protons to be pumped inside of the lysosome in order to lower its pH so that it could proceed. So something else they noticed that was very strange to them, just so happened that they found Earth during a time of a pandemic of coronavirus. So they saw in some of their cells that they collected that there was this foreign material that was destroying the cells. They wanted to know what it was, so they isolated one of these foreign materials, and it was a virus. And they wanted to determine if they were living or not. So they decided that these viruses, they were not living. They are just a parasitic particle that is biologically active. They cannot carry out any life processes on their own. They need a host cell in order to do this. They had a genetic material. They're pretty simple. They're made up of a protein shell called a capsid, and they contain genetic material inside of this shell, which was either RNA or DNA. And so they decided to introduce this virus to a new cell. They put it in there and watched as it worked, and they noticed that first, this virus had to, it couldn't just infect any cell. It had to recognize specific surface receptors and bind to those, and then the host cell would then absorb the virus by a process of endocytosis. And once this virus had entered the cell, they saw that it injected its genetic material inside the cell. Then this genetic material quickly took over and began to assemble more capsids and viral genomes, multiplying its numbers. So once complete, there was hundreds of mature viruses, mature phages, and the cell exploded. It lysed and released these viruses, which quickly infected many other cells. And this was very scary to them. So they decided that it was probably a pretty good time for them to leave before they got sick. And so they wished us good luck, and they were on their way, happy with the information that they were able to collect.